Okay. Namaste. Buongiorno. We welcome Professor Attilio Petruccioli on this occasion of two occasions, the World Landscape Architecture Month as well as the World Heritage Day. And he is a perfect person for both. So we celebrate both these events with a perfect personality. I will just introduce Professor Petruccioli to the audience. Attilio Petruccioli is a professor of landscape architecture and dean of the School of Architecture at the Polytechnic University of Bari, Italy. It is a huge university with around, I think it was in 2006 that it had about 12,000 students. From 1994 to 1998, he was the Aga Khan Professor of Design for Islamic Societies at the Aga Khan Program for Islamic Architecture at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. From 2012 to 13, he was the Mashrib Property Chair at the Qatar University. Professor Petruccioli worked to transform by design a small academic institution in the southern Italy into one of the main international research centers for the study of traditional urban environments and the application of modern information technologies to their physical restoration and social revitalization. As a result of his long-lasting and passionate interest, he has written and edited more than 32 books on the topics of architectural design and the history of Islamic architecture. His research interests are the methodology of design, landscape and contextual design, typological research, and the work of modern architects, traditional settlements and housing, Islamic architecture, town and territory, and Mediterranean landscape architecture. He is currently holding every week very interesting sessions of book reading. He has a huge collection of books, and he is reading these books for the benefit of or sharing it with everyone through his series of bibliothèque. He will be telling you more about it. He has written many books and also worked in India, and his books on Fatehpur Sikri, Volume 1 and Volume 2 is also there, I think. They are wonderful documentations and analysis of the architecture and planning of Fatehpur Sikri. Another book that I love, which is authored by him, is After Amnesia, which is a unique book and one must read it. Together with him, we had conducted exhibitions at Jawahar Kala Kendra, Jaipur, and Manav Sangrahalaya, Bhopal, on the hydraulic architecture of Rajasthan, in which his school, under his guidance, had documented the stepwells of Rajasthan. It was a super documentation. So without holding between the audience and Attilio Petruccioli, I would now like to invite Professor Attilio to deliver his speech on this very important day. Thank you.
Thank you for your very generous presentation. Thank you for inviting me. And also thanks to the institution ISOLA, WLAM-ISOLA Madhya Pradesh, for the opportunity that you're giving to me of talking to an audience that is very close to my heart. Landscape for some people is a vision, a panorama, an image. For other people is an emotion. But we are architects and also teachers of landscape architecture. So we need a method, an approach to the landscape that should be scientific, which means in particular that should be transmissible to the students and logic, based on logic principles. We have to in looking at the landscape, we have to imagine a continuous dialectic relationship between man and nature. The nature is asking the man questions, and the man tries to reply to those questions. And in this dialectic relationship, they both grow. The nature becomes more and more artificial in time, but then the nature asks more difficult questions to the man. So every time the levels of the questions and reply grows, and the man has to provide, progressive techniques in order to reply to the questions of the nature. We, as a school, the School of the Typological Studies to which I belong, has proposed a concept 70 or more years ago, that is that of organism, that works very well for our purpose. The terminology comes from the biology, but gives the sense that the physical structures that we study are organisms. In few words, they are made out of parts that are aggregated together, and they are kept together by a sense of necessity. It means that we cannot eliminate one part, otherwise even the total organism can die. To all this descend some important corollaries of this methodological approach. The first one is that everything is architecture. A building is architecture and an organism. The garden is an organism and architecture. The aggregation of buildings as a quarter or a little village is an organism and architecture. And the landscape and the city are architecture. The division of the scales in disciplines is wrong, conceptually and ethically wrong. The other corollary is that the reading or the interpretation of the landscape might be synchronic or diachronic. Typically, synchronic is the approach that is used by many landscape architects of the Anglo-Saxon world, American and so on. They look at the landscape in its present, they see the problems, they fix them. They don't understand that landscape in the present that they analyze, it comes from a long process of transformation. So we, on the contrary, we look at the diachronically to the landscape through its historical process, because we strongly believe that the principles, the rules, and the know-how of the design landscape are embedded in history. This is totally different from the ideas of the architects, of the avant-garde, of the modern movement that used to, and they still do. They invent a project and they base the project on self-referential rules. The last corollary or principle that we apply, and I am strongly convinced of that, is that the morphology of the land is determinant for the history itself, which means that tell me what your landscape is, the morphology of it is, and I will tell you what is your history. In interpreting a landscape, we could read every landscape as an individual organism, but we we use a tool, which is an intellectual tool, that allows us to analyze, to compare different landscapes together, and to have a very speedy, a quick result compared to other methods. It's based this method on the concept of type. What is type? Type is the organic sum of the common characters or common architectural characters of the buildings, of the other characters of a in a given landscape and in a given time, which means that the concept of type changes in time, of course, because it is produced by the people that live and transform that landscape, and changes in the space. That means that the people living in the region, they have a different idea of the type that exists that is used in another region. Now, the question is, do types of landscape exist, and how they are, for instance. So in order to do that, I have to open the PowerPoint, and we start to work on some images. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I do this and this. Okay. Can you confirm that you can see it?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, don't be worried. This is a diagram because I think it's just a way of thinking that I tend to classify and put things in order. But of course, the discourse can be also applied in different ways. What are important are the principles. Okay, now. If you organize a system, a grid, like, can you see the arrow by chance? You see this? This is the second slide. Okay.
Yeah.
So going back to the grid. So we constructing this grid on top in the horizontal. You have three very general types of morphologies. From the left to the right, you have the ridge, the hill, the bottom of the valley, and the plains.
Yes.
On the vertical, you have here is represented only the type of settlement that you might have, which is from the most simple, that is a very simple, represented like a courtyard, that might be a firm, to the second, that is a sort of linear. I'm going down. Linear settlement of simple houses, a limited hierarchy, like a small village. And then the third one is a municipality where already have special buildings devoted to special functions that could be religious or commercial, market, or institutional. And then the last one is what I call conurbation. That means a system of several of settlements of that level. In that vertical line, I could also put, but there's no space, what are the spaces of the production? And since we are dealing with traditional landscapes, essentially it's the agricultural division of the land. And then the paths that are also very important, the way you move into this territory. If you cross the morphologies with the sediments and the production and the parts, what you get are what I defined as types. Okay, every square is a general type of landscape. Okay, you could object, but look, only 16 types all over the world. They are thousands. Yes, but essentially for the discourse, 16 will be enough. And remember that anytime I can open one of those type squares, add more qualifications and re-subdivide. So I can have under 50, 56, and then 1,000 and so on. But it's not interesting and probably I would not be able to go beyond under 50. One important thing is that with this diagram you can read that single landscapes as single types, but in the same time, if you look at the squares that are in pink colors in the diagonal, you will see that in a certain way that they reproduce a sort of progressive change into a landscape that go from the simplest way of simple minimal sediment on top of the ridge down up to a complex type of a conurbation within the planes. It means that this diagram allows a synchronic and diachronic reading, the way depending the way that you use it. The four pink squares in reality represent a possible cycle of transformation of a landscape that is more typical of temperate climates, where all the conditions of the different conditions of the four types, etc., represent in a certain way phases of this cycle of transformation. Could be Italy, but could be Mediterranean areas, and so on and so forth. At this point, in general, people ask me, and it happened to me in the past, and they say, oh no, forget. One important thing, the pink squares represent types in which the relationship between morphology, that means the question of the nature, and the sediment, the reply of the man, are in balance. That means that there is a proportion between the two. All the others, white, are types that exist in the world, of course, but in those cases, the balance is not in the same, is not correct. They are, in a certain way, unbalanced, but they exist, of course. The most unbalanced are the two at the bottom left or top right. Okay, the bottom left is the place where you have minimal offer made by the nature, and maximum effort and also technological effort in order to reply to this question by the man. Typical is of the bottom left is the oasis, where the offer of the nature is minimum, but it requires an incredible human effort by the man. But also the same could be of places like I don't know, Addis Abeba, where you have on top of an high plateau that is basically dry with a minimal offer. On the contrary, you have a real conurbation that has very limited connections with the local territory, and it's much more connected with the world and so on through the flights and so on. So, and again, there is an incredible disproportion between one question and the reply. And the opposite, top right, you have, for instance, those areas where the nature is extremely generous, like, I don't know, in the tropical areas where it grows naturally everything. And that point, the settlement might be minimal, and it could be just a small farm and so on. And the rest will be made by the nature. Good. The question that sometimes people used to ask, and once I have been asked, where is Iran? And I didn't know how to reply. And then thinking, I realized that Iran is represented by the process of those two pink squares. That it means that you don't, in an area of Iran made out of high plateaus, and mid-level hills, but the other two, but the others are missing, the other conditions of the landscape. The process is shorter, and all the cycle also is shorter, and the landscape in itself is more fragile. So what happens when all these landscapes in diagonal, they complete their own cycle? In general, at the end of the cycle, we have a crisis, and we have a sort of return represented by the red arrow to the original condition, which it doesn't mean that they go completely back to nature, of course, but they simply recuperate a first original condition. So they step back into this first original condition, and then the process starts again into a second cycle. Of course, what means an extremely fragile landscape? It means simply that there's no real process, that you continue every day. You have to provide your effort to keep the situation of that landscape. And when the crisis occurs, this landscape goes back to nature completely. And this, the typical case, is the oasis. Good. I have enlarged here one of those squares. That is the top left. That means a small settlement on top of a ridge. That is the most coherent, and it allows me to show you the little settlement, the land division that is based on sort of feathers of irregular form, and most importantly, the paths that are natural paths based on the ridge. Okay, you can see the long continuous red line, but also the dotted line of the minor ridges. Why I am very much concerned about the ridges? Because I think that the landscapes based on the ridges are the skeleton of our landscapes. It means that in the period of the ridges, which means we have to go back at least 10,000 years or even more, when the man essentially was using the nature in a very spontaneous way, collecting and hunting. That means moving into the landscape and collecting the products of the nature without technology, basically, without any artificial intervention, and choosing then the most logic places for the settlement. And those settlements, we discovered that even after 10,000 years, often, if they were logically selected, they are confirmed, in spite of the long process of transformation of this space. Again, I insist on why the ridge are so important. Because if we want to imagine the world of the man that was a collector, we have to understand that all the plains at that time were flooded, because the lowland, the water tends to go down into the the lowlands. So those territories were totally flooded and difficult to cross, evidently. And a ridge can be, you know what, geographically speaking, a ridge is like the top of a roof. It's just almost a linear path that is dry, because the water tends to slope down on both sides of the ridge. But the ridge can be at 3,000 meters, and that up to that level can be used. After that, if it is more, it cannot be used. But it can also be 30 centimeters, like here in front of MIT in the 90s, you know, when the ice is melted, you know, the sidewalk is flooded, if you want, and people walk on top of the little ridge of 30 centimeters just to keep their feet dry. You don't see the arrow, but you see the red lines. That is the way it is, this silent map that I'm showing to you. It is used by in the regions. It's the people walk along the ridge. The ridges, by definition, are dry. Therefore, in order to settle, they take secondary ridges, and they go into those little forks, and that are promontories, where they can find also the sources. So this is the first scheme. So you will be surprised when you look at the landscape to discover that many of those promontories inhabited during this period are still confirmed and still alive. Some became important, some are just small villages, but they are still there. So the man tend to walk on his own traces more than we expect. The ridge nowadays, you see one ridge in southern Italy, particularly the road that is right in the center of your image. That is a ridge. It is desert, because nowadays the way of using this landscape is completely reverted. The original man used the ridges for many reasons. To move, because it was dry, and it was a sort of natural road existing. And it used also the ridges because it was the military, from the point of view of the military point of view, it was the best position to defend yourself, because you are on top, you can control all the territory in the lower parts and your enemy, but also because that's the only way that you can use to move. And recent works on the genetics, as they have discovered that the man in those times moved, made incredible migrations, you know, of thousands of kilometers using the ridges. The ridge, of course, it was the highway of the prehistory, and it was, of course, the ridges that were the most important were the longest, of course, because they were able to carry more people and tribes, and of course, with the gradient, that means tendentially should be something that has no very sharp slopes and so on, up and downs and so on, that could slow the movement. And in this way, you can understand, for instance, incredible migration like the Indo-European migration into the West. That took two main ways: a collection of ridges that clearly avoid all the main rivers for instance, if you look at the northern black line that goes through Russia and avoids all the rivers, until arrives into a point that is just at the north of Italy. You see the Italy with the typical form. I try with the arrow. This is Italy, okay? And you see the typical form. So all this process of course, the region was extremely slow because they had to avoid all the rivers. They were not able to cross them. So they had to go up to the source and then down, and then up and down. But then you have the entrance into Italy in that point, and then you have a minor region. I mean, minor. It's a chain of hills that go from top, where we have the Alps, down, up to the end. That is the highway, one of the highways used by the Indo-Europeans to enter into Italy, move along all the, we call that the boot, because Italy has a form of a boot. And then from that secondary ridge, through other ridges, descend down into the lowest part and occupy all Italy. And you have a look here that is not usual from top down, okay? But it's important because it's an hypothesis of the man that from the ridge of the Alp enters into Italy. You see the chain, the continuous chain of the hills that go up to up to the lowest part of Italy next to Sicily. And from there, all the other parts of Italy slowly were occupied by the Indo-Europeans. To confirm the importance of the permanence of the original structure of the primitive phase, for instance, what we understand, for instance, why Rome is Rome. So Rome is located, as you know, on a river called the Tiber, which is 400 kilometers long. I was talking about Iranian on this top of that.
Yeah.
And this is the oasis.
Yes.
This is the top left, first talking about the sediment of simple sediment on top of a ridge.
Mm.
The idea that the lowlands in the early prehistory, are flooded. So the only way of movement is through the ridges, on top of the ridges, because those are the only part that is dry. And in front of MIT, you have this example, at a micro scale that reproduces what we have seen before. Okay, the lowlands and the ridge, 30 centimeters.
This is very interesting.
So the only possibility was avoiding the streams. That means that you have to go along. Can you see the arrow now?
Yes.
Okay. So you can avoid that. This is a ridge, But then in order to settle, you have to go a little down into those forks that actually are promontories, And so you can go next to the sources because water is needed for the sediment, okay?
Yes.
So in certain cases, you can even cross the stream, provided it is very, 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 very low, a small stream, very low. But even at that time, we understand that in this moment of synthesis between two words, one word of one ridge and the other word of another ridge that is here, So they make synthesis. They are unified and interconnected.
Yeah.
This is a typical ridge. You see this part, this is a ridge. And I have explained that ridge is important because you can orient yourself because you see from the top, you can defend yourself, and most importantly, you can move because the ridge is a sort of natural road that exists, and it is dry.
Yes.
The word of the prehistorian is completely opposite to our. He was looking from the top down. We live in the plains. Our world is a world of the plains. We don't use anymore the ridges. So we look from the top up, and we use the ridges just for hunting or for trekking or whatever, okay? But the ridges are long lines also that favored the huge migrations of the prehistory and so on. So, for instance, those two lines, the one on top, the black one, that come from the north, and the other one that comes in the south through Turkey and so on, Balkans, arrives to both in this point, okay, which is the point of entrance, if you want, into Italy, Italy being this here, okay, and through a secondary ridge, a secondary of hills, of course, not so secondary, you can cross all Italy up to the end, and from there you can spread into the all the regions of Italy. So this is the way the Indo-Europeans arrived to our country and Europe. And in this image, you can see the system of the Alps that close Italy in a certain way. There is a similarity in spite of the difference of the size between India and Italy. I see it at least. And you see the entrance that is in this point, and the system of the Apennines, the hills that cross all Italy. That is a sort of highway of the Indo-Europeans. I was discussing this slide. The idea of this permanence, you know, of the original structure based on the ridges, also explains why certain sites remain confirmed all over the history and became in certain cases extremely important. Why Rome is Rome, for instance. Rome is on you see the morphology to the right. It's on top of on a river called Tiber that is 400 kilometers long. But along this 400 kilometers, there's only one fort, which is in this point, where this point and this point, where all the river extends into the plain around that becomes very, very low. That is a possible fort. To this point, tended that all the ridges of different civilizations, you know, the Etruscans were on the left, the Latins were on the right here, and the Sabine coming from the east here, and all of them pointing into this ford that was the only point of passage and also the only point of connection of those three, well, I call them civilization. And by syncretism, Rome was born, and then is still there. We changed land, and we are in Algeria now. Along the ridge that the lower region that was coming from the south, from Uganda even, and then went along on the top of the dunes of the shores of the Mediterranean, and then in the back of those mountains in Algeria and so on, it reached Morocco. I will talk about this area that I'm talking here, which is an area of mountains. It's called Kabylia, where a population called Berbers live even today. And that is a sort of refugee area because it was bypassed by the various phases of history. And so it's a country that is based on still, in a certain way, on the ridge structure. I have drawn here this at the scale 1 to 50,000, the system of the ridges, that are those black lines, and that they are dotted by white dots that are simple villages, all of them on top of the ridge. Okay. It is interesting to note that sociologists and scholars, they have studied this system, and they have discovered that uh, all one full ridge is inhabited by people that belong to the same tribe. So they are all the different small clans that live on the same ridge. They are all related, and their tribe brings the same name. The other one that is parallel, for instance, this one is inhabited by a different tribe, of course, with a different name. So in this way, we clearly understand that the ridge is not only a geographical accident, but it is also an idea of landscape. It is also a political structure, or defines a political structure. You will also note that this long ridge that now I follow with the arrow ends with a sort of bigger village down here, overlooking the plain, the bottom of the valley, and that is the capital, in a certain way, the capital of the system. The village that actually later on developed into a much more important, significant settlement. Um, why, why I'm showing you this type of landscape? Because this is a type of landscape that was perfectly balanced between the morphology that was based on ridges, system of ridges, and the reply of man that requires simple settlements, linear, just based on top of the ridge, as you can see in this image, and a simple production that was carried on along the slopes of the hill. Here, of course, this system survived, up to 1857, more or less, when the French arrived, and using a different technology, they were able to occupy this territory and make a change of phase into a sort of second phase, using a different road that you see here in foreground along the same contour level, so almost flat, which is a model road, used by the French. But otherwise, it was perfectly balanced. It means that the speed in which the phases occur is different from place to place, of course. It depends on the fact that if this type is balanced, it doesn't change, And of course, I don't make any evaluation in terms of quality, if one is better or not. I'm simply describing what it is there. When in this area, I also find confirm of what I told you, that everything is architecture, and that all the scales are interrelated in their transformation. To the left, you see a typical village that is based on this path, which is a pedestrian path, territorial, that crosses all the system. It's a linear structure, and all the settlement is based on linear path created by the aggregation of the houses. You see to the right, the original house of the ancestors is to the left, next to the street, and then it goes down, up to the level of the agriculture, and then you can get out into the agriculture. And of course, all this, let's say, linear neighborhood, it belongs to the same family. In the second phase is of the evolution of the landscape is characterized by necessary interventions of the man in order to organize the slope of the hill through artificial, plants in order to cultivate them, in order also to improve the quantity and the quality of the crops, and also in order to organize this passage that could be here, for instance, that goes along the same contour line, okay, which is much faster, of course, than going up and down the ridges. But that, of course, requires a jump in terms of technological use of the tools by the man. And you see that in this sketch, that now in black are the cross ridge paths, that cross the streams, because now they have this technology. And for instance, the dotted old parts of the regions that maybe are dismissed because they are not useful anymore. Others regions that are still in use. More frequent synthesis between crossing through fords. So the system becomes more dense, and you have new, starting from, for instance, these cross ridges. You see that I'm underlining here. You have a sort of descent at the lower level into other forks that are lower, using minor ridges. Okay, from cross ridge into minor ridges and other promontories. So slowly we have a total conquest of this part of this area. In this phase, when all the top of the hills is complete and they start to descend into the bottom of the valleys, we have another important phenomenon, that is the arrival of population that come from the sea. And they settled, along the shores of the sea in the stations, and they slowly start to walk along the main rivers, and they get in contact with the existing landscape of the hills. I don't pretend to give you a lecture on India, which I didn't study enough, but I want to show you this sketch made by my master, that also is the founder of the School of Topological Studies, Saverio Muratori. In this part of his life, he studied the Chinese, the Indian, the Mediterranean landscape, and so on. Systematically, he prepared an atlas that was never published, and these sketchy drawings are preserved in the archives, and they can be studied by further scholars and so on. It is interesting that he shows in the first sketch the reading and interpretation of the Indian subcontinent, from the entrance to the left, where you have basically the Khyber Pass, that the entrance is here, but let's say the occupation of the territory occurs through a path that is basically a part of Piedmont. That means that belongs to the second phase, more or less. It's a sort of contour line, continuous contour lines that crosses the system in the highest part, where the streams are much more under control, and that can be crossed through these cross ridges paths. And then finds more or less in this area, we are in Bihar, the possibility of crossing the Ganga, and then spread through the Vindhya mountains, to the left and to the right of the system, I think this is the river Narbada in the middle. So
Yes,
all those,
yes.
all those are cross-ridge paths that structure the landscape, and from which you can see other little lines that are yellow that go along minor ridges, no, down from the cross ridges into the plains, and slowly, then through the gaps down. You know, the system of the interpretation is more clear. I can't tell you more, but I think that it could be interesting to extend these studies. One day somebody will do that. So finally, we have the third phase in which this system on top of the hills is consolidated, occupies the bottom of the valleys, but not yet the plains, but establishes also first structural connection with the people of the sea that have their station along the shores. Important, of course, is the fourth phase. And the fourth phase, the humanity is able to occupy the plains, but it requires an incredible structure, not structure, sorry, an incredible technology of the drainage in order to make them usable for the. This is a small portion of the plains that called Pianura Padana, where the Romans have completely transformed those plains into usable agricultural land, and also controlled by a very precise land division based on squares that are called the centuria, so that everything is controllable and measurable. And it's interesting to note that the town here, bottom left, called Imola, it's based on the same standard that is used also for the territory. The Romans had a very strong sense of this idea of the territory, although, of course, their abstract division of the land in reality was always adapted to the morphology of the land. Okay, so you don't divert a river in order to preserve the orientation of your grid. So you have several grids interconnected, but measurable, and the interconnection and the rotation is always measurable. Similarly, all the scales are under control. If you know, for instance, that in the city, you see a small town in North Africa called Timgad. You see that the little plot is based on the same standard, which is a submodule of the territorial module, which is called forgot the name, which is under 20 by under 20 feet, for instance. But if you look at the courtyard houses that are used as a type, basic type for the city, you will realize that the front of the Roman house, courtyard house, has a front that is a standard of 40 or 60 feet. That is a submodule of the plot. The plot is a submodule of the city is submodule of the territorial module. All this construction that you see to the left, which is the complete fourth phase of a small portion of Italy made in the time of the Roman Empire, all the plains are occupied by the productive areas. You have long infrastructures, road that cross all Italy, and the system on top of the hills is still alive, but separated. It has a separate life from the internal. But the organism in this case is the most complete. Here to the left, you see the grids and so on, the cities and all that. The system, when it gets in crisis, look at the right, what happened? The first that is dismantled are the plains here, because they go back to swamps normally. not completely. You know, you have here and here little parts that still can survive with the modest agricultural economy, but most of it are swamps, not used anymore. The long infrastructure road is cut in pieces, so it works only locally, and so the system goes back up, you know, into the hills, occupies maybe all sites that were abandoned, or simply confirms the sites that still were on top of there. And from there, the cycle starts again. So according to our ideas, you know, what we live now is the end of a second cycle. So we are facing now, but I don't go on this discourse, a moment of crisis that faces or waits for important transformations of our faith. So when the students are get familiar with the landscape or landscapes plural through the typological behaviors of the landscapes, uh, they acquire an ability to read a landscape, a settlement or a landscape that might be also complicated or apparently chaotic as an aggregation of structures into an organism. So if you look at the image to the right, it's very clear. You know, you have on top, look at the image to the right. On top, you have a small promontory that ends in this point. It's basically coming from a ridge, and then later on continues and goes down, always along a more gentle promontory, let's say, and stops here. Okay, so this is basically a system that is generated by a first phase and then developed like that. And you have here to the right, you know, look at this image. This is in Africa. It's a very simple linear village on top of a cross ridge on the same level, you know, very, very simple. But sometimes you have the combination of different conditions and different phases. You know, look at this image to the right, is a small Italian village. You know, you have a ridge here that stops in the promontory that is generated by two cross ridges, okay, like this. And what is important to note is a basic rule. When you have the intersection of two different phases, you know, in the intersection is located the main node of the city, where the most important functions are located. In this case, we have this triangular square, beautiful there. I don't analyze this complicated structure, you know, but believe me, it's an organism in which every part can be disassembled, separate, and read as a logic composition of a total organism. I'm finishing. Okay, provided students are able to read a complicated space at the end of a course that at the end is only a semester and therefore it's not a big thing, we don't have to forget that they have to be able to design a landscape. So they, from the interpretation, they have to be able to arrive to the design of the landscape. So I give to them a simple exercise. I take a silent map like those that I've shown you before, in which you have the rivers, the waters, the contour lines, basically the natural base of an hypothetically invented landscape taken from Italy. I say, look, this is an hilly landscape in central Italy. You have to design it. So you have to reconstruct all the process of the phases, you know, from the first to the fourth, etc. So they start to the left to locate the ridges. logic settlements connected with the regions according to the orientation, according to the quality of the geology, according to the climate, and so on and so forth. You know that you see here. They move into the second phase. Some of the ridges paths are confirmed, some are abandoned, and then you have the cross ridges that are lower that generate new settlement and so on, until in the left image you have the conquest, the occupation of the bottom of this valley that is large enough, but not very, very big, but large enough to have systematic land division, organizing, a productive, very productive area, etc., 1, 2, and 3 that you see there. The fourth phase doesn't exist because this morphology doesn't contain plains, so you don't have the fourth phase, but a fourth phase basically is the confirm of the third phase with the addition of two important settlements that in that phase became real cities. So it is what we call the sort of unbalanced type of landscape, but that's not the question. Now, the question is that in reality, I have cheated my students. In reality, what I have shown to them is not an invented landscape, but it's a real landscape of Italy. At that point, I take out the atlas and I allow them to check what you have done, if that actually corresponds to the reality. Now, as you can imagine, the reality is so complex that their scheme vaguely, resembles the reality. But also, they have learned one important thing, that the serious, the coherent project of landscape is not a project that is invented, but it is the project that gets closer to the reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Attilio. That was a wonderful interpretation of landscape and how. I would now invite the audience if they want to interact with Professor Attilio. I'm very happy to welcome Professor Nalini Thakur in this session. We are blessed to have her here.
Let me say hi to Nalini, and we are good friends.
Madam, we cannot hear you. Your mic is off.
Thank you very much for this wonderful lecture. It has been a pleasure to listen to you, Professor Petruccioli, because you are talking about real theory that is coming from your head, from your experience on a landscape. And I think that is what we need to, that is what is the need of the hour, at least in India now. And to hear you was really fantastic because it taught me so many things. I understood so many things. At such a broad level, you can say so many things. I think it's wonderful. Thank you very much. I will actually follow this up myself, because I think it's very pragmatic. And I think it may help us here in India also, to look at landscape the way you have done. And it's really a lot of experience. Experience in the Mediterranean, experience in India, it's experience in, Italy. I mean, it comes from application, on the ground. And I'm really happy about that. Thank you very much. And maybe I might get in touch with you and I will follow it up for this country because I think we need to do that. You did show one picture of what is the, what was, this Muratori's, kind of one sketch. But I think one can actually develop that a bit across to actually understand a little more of how the place was all settled, more in a more real, from real terms, which we get from the way we sort of keep looking at these things, So one can have a go at that, and I think that would be great to spend a few years on that now. For a retired woman like me, thank you.
You can never
I'm
retire,
retired too.
Professor.
I'm retired too.
Retired word
No.
does not suit you, both of you.
Well, I want I thank you. I thank you for your generous words. It's not all product of my thinking. You know, I'm proud to say that I'm part of a school that is working on architecture and landscape since at least 60 years. And so there are already generation of people that pass the theory from one to the other, and everyone is bringing something and elaborating or applying to different contexts. You know, the way I did mainly work on the Islamic world and India and so on. So that was my contribution, and I think that it is important that something that is produced is given to others that will continue and so on. I hope to be still alive for some more days to put my attention now on the Indian landscape at the big scale, the one that Muratori studied, because he did, very deep work. The book was ready, you know, but he never published because he died. And that's it, you know, we go on. I'm glad that I have conveyed to you some different way of looking at the landscape. But I think it's important to understand that the landscape is not casual. It's a product of logic, changes and decisions that are taken according to the nature.
Yes.
Well, not only nowadays it doesn't happen according to logic anymore, but sometimes yes, sometimes no. But probably we should go back to this attention to the landscape, because the replies in a certain way are already in the context.
Yeah. And I think, like Professor Attilio in his beginning note said that this compartmentalization of architecture landscape is not, or planning is not really good. Like it is all, it should be a combined knowledge to have more sustainable cities and development. So that is, I also agree to him that it should not be compartmentalized. Everyone should have the landscape logic in their planning. Like Le Corbusier had said, plan is the generator. So we should say the landscape plan is the generator of all the settlements. Like he's so nicely with logic and science he proved it.
I totally agree. You know, the compartmentalization is an invention of the professors because they have to create chairs. But in the reality, there's no reason for that. You know.
Yes, I know. Anyone else from the audience? Would you like to? Anyone would like to interact with professors?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for
Good afternoon to you.
presentation.
Pankaj is an architect from Doha.
Sir, I've seen your work. I think you are associated with Qatar University for Musharraf master planning.
Yes, I spent 5 years there, and it was very instructive. I learned a lot about what shouldn't be done, you know, in terms of landscape architecture. You know, you learn more in the extreme conditions.
Yes.
Because in Doha, in the Gulf, you know, you have extreme conditions. So it's in generally speaking, yeah, sorry.
True. Sir, I wanted to ask one thing. Like in your presentation, you touch base on one key component, which is wages. So my understanding is, like, when you see, I will take a bigger footprint like cities, not the small towns. Most of the cities, like global cities, they are on plain terrain, and maybe the key reason for their growth and development is the public infrastructure. So do you think that if any city which is growing on ridges or any town, they face any challenges in terms of transportation, logistics? And
No, yes. First of all, I have emphasized the importance of the regions compared to the other cross regions and Piedmont streets and parts, and or connections that occur in the plains. Because I wanted to emphasize this idea that of the permanence of the landscape, okay, of the resistance there, of the first move made by the men that still are there and guide us in a certain way. Regarding the question that you are asking, of course, the word of the regions is a word of pedestrians, basically, you know.
true.
And therefore, the idea itself of reach and important settlement, city and conurbation, it does exist in everywhere in the world, but it is conflictual. No, it's problematic. It's difficult. So then the idea itself of a huge conurbation requires the plain. It's connected. It goes together with the idea of the plains.
True. But on the other side, the beauty of ridges is, like, you can at least like practice the vernacular architecture, and we can be close to the nature and in comparison to large settlements.
Absolutely true. In a certain way, I have tried to underline the idea that when you go down along the diagonal, along those squares from the ridge down to the plains, clearly your landscape becomes more and more artificial, more and more mineral. And of course, if you want a contact with the, let's say, the original nature, then you have to keep yourself up, you know, close to the ridges. But it's also true that we live in landscapes that are all artificial. You know, in Italy, there's no one landscape that is natural, because even the green landscapes, they have been completely transformed and adapted by the man. You know, you don't have one natural landscape, real, totally natural landscape in Italy and in the Mediterranean too. You know, and you know, maybe in America I've seen some natural landscapes, because they have been settled so late that the people arriving from Europe, they were not interested into certain marshy areas, or you know, in the Appalachians or so, whatever. But it's very rare. You know, even when we say, oh, this is a natural landscape, oh, beautiful mountains, trees, and whatever, that's not true. It's artificial, and this is beautiful. I mean, you know, it's cultural. You know.
Yeah.
True. Thank you, sir. Thank you. It was an honor to listen to your presentation. Thank you very much.
You are very kind. It was a pleasure. Let's do again.
Sure. We'll take all your time.
Okay.
And
Can I ask you, Savita, if you recorded this lecture?
yeah,
If you recorded, you can give me a copy so I can better for the next time.
sure. We are recording and we will give you a copy. Certainly.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you. It was a pleasure to see all of you in very good shape.
Yeah. Sure. It was a
Have a
pleasure
nice
to give us.
Sunday.
Thank you. So, is there anyone else who wants to interact, or I will just sum up quickly? I will try to sum up because he touched upon some very basic and pertinent issues about design and planning, which everyone should practice. So, should I sum up now, or is there someone else? Okay. So I really thank Professor Attilio for such a beautiful talk. Beautiful, I say, because he is looking at the landscapes as with a scientific eye, with a logical eye, and which is what we need. Landscape is not a separate capsule. It is the main source of all development. So one needs to understand and read the landscapes scientifically. As he said, that landscapes, you look at them as a nice panorama or a vision, but we need to have a scientific approach and based on logic and principles. And what I loved about his talk was this continuous dialectic relationship between man and nature, the nature raising its questions and the man trying to answer it. But both are growing together. He was talking about the progressive techniques to reply to the question of nature. Then he talked about the physical structure and the parts accredited together by a sense of responsibility and the methodological approach that has been developed so intrinsically by him. He is humble enough to say it is not just his work, but it has added on through a number of work from number of years by his predecessors. He is saying that everything is architecture and it is the present is the synchronic and the historical process is the diachronic, and one must have a synthesis between the two. Morphology of land is determinant of the history itself. And he so nicely, in a such simple manner, he showed how man moved from the movement corridors of man and the pattern of the ridges. And it was so simple to understand how understand the cultural landscapes of this region, specifically the Indo-European region. And he was talking of the concept of time and the changes in space. He also talked of the types of landscapes through his very, very nice sketches, that matrix that he has developed, the graphical matrix. And he said that the morphology graphical matrix, and he gave examples of Rome, and he also came to India and showed us a very beautiful map of ridges and valleys of India. I really love the example of the small 30 centimeter ridge of MIT, which is used during the flooding. He also talked of top-to-down approach from ridges to the valleys, and when one went from valleys to the ridges and how it impacted on the settlements and the design of the settlements. He drew examples from Algeria, and he talked of the different layers, the landscape layer, the sociological layer, how a certain tribe or a type of people will settle on one ridge and the middle ridges and so on. And the political layer, all dependent and readable with the ridge layer. So I would say that the work done in the School of Typological Studies, of which he was talking, is tremendous, and I think it should be part of our. We must have more interaction with this school. And in India, where we are facing so many, all the cities are facing problems of waterlogging, this lecture should be one of the eye openers for the Indian planners where the flooding and waterlogging is happening because there is no reading of the landscapes, the landscape structure that he's talking. So we come back to his title, History, Structure and Landscapes, which is so relevant today. And when we talk of sustainable development, it becomes all the more relevant. So his interpretations of landscapes, the real landscapes, the design landscapes, and reconstruction of all processes of landscapes based on logic is extremely important today. Thank you very much, Professor Attilio. I hope I was able to submit properly. I cannot match your expertise.
You did a wonderful work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thanks for giving us time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very
Professor
much.
Nadu. Yeah.
Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Professor Nalini.